I want to start out by thanking Americans for Safe Access and Steph Scherer. She says a lot of nice things about a lot of nice people here, but she's been a mentor to me, and you guys are so lucky to have someone who devotes so much time, so much energy to the professionalism and the level. This is a tough discussion to have at the levels that it's taking place right now, at those upper levels of government, at those upper levels of when dealing with lawmakers and otherwise. And you can always be sure that Steph and the folks at Americans for Safe Access are on point promoting patient-centered access. And it's just remarkable to see. And I thank you so much, Steph and Asa. I also want to thank Riel Kapler and Lynn Bellil, who passed off some slides to me, because I was invited to this panel a bit last minute, so that I've heavily modified them. They'll be happy to know, so we could talk about the Canadian program. So first, let me give you guys a bit of background. Canada, unlike the US, does have a federal medical marijuana program. No need to applaud or cheer, because unfortunately it's a highly flawed program, as those of you who know about the program. It's been problematic from the start. It's not just my opinion, it's been found unconstitutional for not creating a path to safe access for patients in about 8 different court decisions over the last 11 years. So it's a program that's led to, unfortunately, some benefits for patients, but also a lot of pain and consternation for the medical cannabis community. So we have a program not because our federal government decided to do this out of the goodness of their own heart. We have a program because of a couple of court decisions, and the key court decision that led to our federal program is R versus Parker, in which a Canadian who used cannabis for medical purposes won the constitutional right to choose cannabis as a medicine without the fear of criminal sanctions. And that was in 1999. And in 2001, we actually had a program put in place called the MMAR. According to some recent research, there's somewhere between 400,000 and 1 million Canadians, or about 4% of the adult population, that report having used cannabis for self-defined medical conditions or medical reasons. Despite these 1 million Canadians who use medical cannabis, as of October 12, 2012, only about 26,000 Canadians had obtained the authorization to possess cannabis for medical purposes. We'll talk about some of the challenges a little bit later, but what this means is that only a tiny percentage of the population of medical cannabis users are protected from arrest through the federal program. And last year, our conservative federal government introduced harsh mandatory minimum sentences for cannabis possession, production, and distribution, which threaten both patients and dispensaries. So what we've got is a reverse of what's going on in the US, where you guys have had this horrible experience with mandatory minimums. You're starting to reject those policies. In Canada, we're just starting to adopt mandatory minimum policies. And to give you an example, if you're growing 6 plants or more in Canada right now, you can face up to 6 months of mandatory minimum sentences, as if it's been shown that you're redistributing them. And since most medical marijuana users and producers are not covered by the federal program, they're inevitably caught up in the legal net of prohibition under these current circumstances. Now, there have been a lot of studies that have looked at the patient experiences in the federal program, and I've been lucky to be involved in a couple of them. This is a study that I published this year. It's a quality assessment of the federal medical marijuana program, and there we go. And more recently, there's been a federal survey, or a national survey, of the experiences of medical cannabis patients, known as the Cannabis Access for Medical Purposes study. And so we have been able to research the patient experience, and inevitably what we find is that the challenges to access in all the studies that have been done and all the court challenges that have been put forward in Canada point to the same few problems. There's a tremendous resistance from the medical community, who are legally allowed to prescribe cannabis, to do so. Right now, there's been letters of opposition from the Canadian Medical Association and from their main insurer, the Canadian Medical Protection Association, that have told doctors basically not to participate in this program, or at least made them well aware of the challenges or some of the potential liabilities they face if they participate in the program. Additionally, the application process is a lengthy 33-page application, which, of course, you show up with your doctor with that. He's never keen on filling that out. It doesn't go to a pharmacy or a dispensary. It goes to Health Canada, so there's kind of a federal registry going on there, and I think that makes doctors uncomfortable as well. We do have a federal cannabis producer, just like you guys have NIDA producing cannabis in the US. In Canada, there's a federal production facility, a company called Prairie Plant Systems. They've been very restricted in the type of cannabis they're able to produce and the way that it's produced. And so as a result, they have a single strain available. It's 12% THC. And as you can imagine, with single strain, pre-ground cannabis that's gamma irradiated, when you have access through dispensaries or even through the black market, it hasn't proved to be a very popular product because of the way it's produced. People don't like getting cannabis through the mail as opposed to having it through a kind of a community style access center, as you might see through a compassion club. And so there's been very low uptake for the federal cannabis supply. There's also cost as an ongoing barrier. It's a barrier here in the US as well. I really urge you guys who are looking right now at these kind of taxed initiative, states that are wanting to tax medical cannabis, to really consider how that's going to affect patient experience. I've never been supportive of taxing medicine, whether it's cannabis or otherwise. And we know through every study that's been done of the patient populations in Canada and the US that medical cannabis patients are typically lower income than the average, and cost is an impediment. When people have to choose between having food in their fridge or paying for their rent, having a roof over their heads, or having medicine to allow them to eat the food in their fridge, that's not a fair choice. It's not an ethical choice for people to make. And the last aspect of the program that's a bit irksome in Canada is that although I've been coming down here for about 10 years talking about the benefits of community-based nonprofit dispensaries, and I'm so glad to see so many US state systems now adopting that as their de facto way of getting cannabis to patients, in Canada, the long-standing medical cannabis dispensary system is not regulated or recognized at any level of government. In other words, every single person who works at a dispensary in Canada, from the day they open the door till the nighttime when they close up, is doing an act of civil disobedience, and they take a risk of arrest, and particularly under these new laws, significant legal threat for helping critically and chronically ill Canadians. So there's a few of the problems that we're facing. But that's where dispensaries come in. Now, medical cannabis dispensaries, also known as compassion clubs in Canada, have been established since 1997, so they actually predate the federal medical marijuana program. The oldest dispensary in Canada is the British Columbia Compassion Club Society. The folks at BCCS quickly point to the good work of WHAM and some of the California dispensaries that were involved early on in this program as the kind of shining light and the model that they built their dispensaries around. So, believe me, all of our policies influence each other so much, and that's why I think this panel is so important, whether it be Canada and the US or what's going on in Israel or in Holland. There are approximately 50 dispensaries in Canada, serving about 50,000 patients right now, and they're not part of the legal framework, but they have been upheld in a number of court decisions. I was charged originally with 3 counts of trafficking in 2000 for work I was doing at the Vancouver Island Compassion Society that I started, and ended up, after 2 years in court, getting praise from the judge for the good work that was being done. He said so many nice things that when I ran for city council a few years later, I actually quoted from my court decision, because when a judge is saying so many nice things, what he stated was that the Vancouver Island Compassion Society was able to do what Health Canada was unable to do, which was quote-unquote supply safe access to a good source of cannabis for those who need it. I want to talk about the kind of self-regulation that's been going on. It's an effort that's been going on in the US and that's been paralleled in Canada as well. Dispensaries, since governments don't want to regulate us, have been moving forward with self-regulation. That started really with the guidelines for the community-based distribution of medical cannabis in Canada. It's a document that was co-authored by myself and Riel Kapler in 2006. And it's still in use by many Canadian cannabis dispensaries. And I'm always amazed when I come down in the US to see all the US dispensaries that have looked at this document as a regulatory document. It says in Canada, but I'm telling you, there's nothing particularly Canadian about it. If you're starting a dispensary, this is a really useful document to show kind of level of expectations of service delivery that you can look towards and that your patients expect and that your community expects. It's also something you can give to your neighbors if you're opening up a new dispensary, and let them know what they can expect from the work that's going on where you're going. I was talking to my friend Amanda Ryman the other day, or yesterday, and she mentioned that a new dispensary was opening up just a few blocks from her house, and she said, isn't that great, you know, because there's going to be extra lights and security, etc. And I thought, man, if that's the way that we could get everyone in the US to view it every time a dispensary opens up in their neighborhood, it makes good sense, it's exactly true, but we've got to stop the fear-mongering that comes when, you know, when people start doing compassionate work in a community. The process of self-regulation has now been taken over, really, by the Canadian Association of Medical Cannabis Dispensaries. It's a new organization that was founded by directors of Canadian dispensaries in 2011 with the following 4 goals: the legislation, certification, integration, and research of medical cannabis in Canada. By, of course, legislation, certification, and integration, they're talking about being part of the federally recognized program and getting more legal backing for what community-based dispensaries do. CAMCD states that its mission is to promote a regulated, community-based approach to medical cannabis access and to support medical cannabis dispensaries to provide the highest quality of patient care. I'm going to cite Amanda Ryman once again, who did some research showing that patients who access dispensaries in California find a higher level of care there than they do through their traditional healthcare delivery services. And I think the same is true in Canada. This really is a patient-centered model of access, and any state or country that's not looking at this as the optimal system is missing the boat. This is what patients want, and patients benefit from this system. Now, Aaron, Rade, and Blaine, who are here today, if you could raise your hand, they're representing Canadian Associations for Medical Cannabis Dispensaries. If you're interested in the Canadian certification program or the standards they're setting up, they're happy to answer any questions that you might have. I've been really fortunate to be involved with CAMCD as an advisor and more recently as a co-investigator in the Medical Cannabis Seed Project. The Medical Cannabis Seed Project stands for Standards, Engagement, Evaluation, and Dissemination. Who doesn't like a good acronym? Come on. So we got funding from the University of British Columbia, myself, Zach Walsh, and Riel Kapler, to work with CAMCD on a 3-year basis to help in the development of this certification and standards process. And what we're doing is to create the standards and also to be able to evaluate them. So we want to see how these standards are affecting patient satisfaction with dispensaries, as well as the impact on communities, particularly in regards to their awareness and understanding and support for both medical cannabis and for community-based dispensaries. So we're bringing an evidence-based lens to the certification program, which has been a great relationship, and it's working really well. Now, the CAMCD dispensaries, or the certifications, it's an incredibly long document. I don't want to get too far into it, but it does look at different aspects of patient care, including patient eligibility, patient intake, products and services, dispensing, supply, safety, security and privacy, and effective organization. So it really covers the gamut of what you want to look for in terms of certifying and standardizing services. The biggest medical cannabis news in Canada over the last few years, however, has been Health Canada's planned revamping of the federal program, which is due to take place over the next few months. The new regulations include some very positive changes and some positive progressive steps by our federal government, as well as some very negative changes that are going to impact patient experiences. On the pro side, we have a simplified, decentralized application process. As it stands right now, when you're a medical cannabis patient, you get your doctor to fill out your form, you send it away to Health Canada. Within 6 weeks to 6 months, you hear back from them whether or not they've accepted your forms and everything's complete, and hopefully at that point you're a legal user. Now, of course, if you're a terminal patient who's been diagnosed with 2 or 3 months to live, this system is completely ineffective for you. You slip through the cracks. So this new program will allow a doctor to sign what's the equivalent of a prescription, and you'll walk out with legal protection on the same day. So this is a great improvement. The other great improvement that I really want to see happen in the US as well is that nurse practitioners look like they're going to be allowed to prescribe. Now, I think that is a change that would really benefit the US system as well, where so many doctors continue to be resistant to signing and participating in these medical marijuana programs. In the US, the first medical association to support Medical cannabis was the American Nursing Association, and in Canada it was the exact same as the Canadian Nursing Association. So nurses have been on the front line of medical cannabis as supporters for a long time, and it's about time they get the right to prescribe. Pharmacies can also distribute, so that's going to be a new step in the Health Canada program that's really going to be helpful. I really believe in the dispensary system, but the fact is there's not going to be a dispensary in every city in Canada and every city in the US, and I think that anything that increases options for access should be looked at. And I totally welcome cannabis being accessible through pharmacies. There's some percentage of the population that's only going to be comfortable accessing their cannabis in that way. They don't want to come to a compassion club no matter how friendly we make them, and no matter how, even if we stop burning patchouli, they're not coming in. So I think that anything that increases options is great. I just don't want to see something that limits options. It shouldn't just be pharmacies, because frankly, a pharmacist is not going to teach you how to roll a joint, how to make a tincture, how to use a vaporizer. That's not their role, and that's not what they're good at. They're also going to be issuing multiple large-scale licenses to producers, and an unlimited number. So we're going to go from one federally authorized producer this year to next year and the ensuing years maybe having 50, 70, 100 federally licensed producers on a large scale. Now there's a lot of hoops to jump through, there's going to be a lot of security requirements and a lot of quality control measures, but I think overall that can only be looked at as a very good step and a positive step for patients. Because I have to tell you right now, if I opened up a dispensary with a single strain of cannabis that's pre-ground, that was gamma irradiated, and I had to sell that to your population, to patients, my dispensary would not last 3 months. And that's the current federal supply line. You need multiple strains, and hopefully, eventually we'll get to a point of multiple methods of ingestion. We're not quite there yet. The other good stuff is increased quality control. Obviously, if it's coming through these large-scale federal licensed producers, there's going to be biological testing for heavy metals, and all that's going to improve, I think, the end product for patients. And there's going to be an increased strain symptom awareness. So not just availability, but I think that producers are going to be motivated to look at how different strains affect different conditions and different symptoms in a way that hasn't happened yet. And that information, I think, is going to be invaluable to providing more patient-centered care, so that if you're coming in and you're suffering from HIV/AIDS or hepatitis C or from a specific symptom like strains that in some cases may be more about a loss of personal production is the one issue that's giving people the most worry. Right now, patient option that they've chosen, it's something that patients want and have requested and have won through the courts, and Health Canada is about to take away their rights to do so. So those patients who have invested the time and the money into equipment as of April 2014 will not be federally authorized or protected to grow their own medicine anymore. And that's a real negative step for a patient point of view. Health Canada's own research suggests that the cost of cannabis and the increase in cost is going to lead to at least 20% of the patient base that's part of the program right now not being able to afford the new system. So they're talking about 20,000 or about 6,000 patients that are simply not going to be able to participate in our new system. And it's an honest admission by Health Canada, but one that should give them more concern. The other problems with the program are that physicians remain the gatekeepers. Physicians will still have to fill out forms that their associations are telling them not to fill out. And so I think that opening up to nurse practitioners is a great step, but I think that we also need to include eventually naturopaths, doctors of traditional Chinese medicine, basically certified organizations that have more experience and more comfort dealing with herbal remedies need to be included in this system. Dispensaries are not included in new regulations, and there's no community-based or storefront distribution allowed under the new system unless you're a pharmacy. And so there is some thought that maybe some of the dispensaries in Canada can become pharmacies de facto. So we're going to have to see how that gets unrolled to see if the dispensary system can get tucked into the pharmacy system. But the idea right now is that you would get your cannabis sent to you through the mail. And I think it's a flawed system that's going to add a lot of cost to the end users. If you had to pay for someone to send you cannabis every time you ordered an eighth, and you had to pay literally a double signature system, it's going to add $30 to every eighth that you order. And I think that's going to be a big problem. And ultimately, I don't think this is a really patient-centered system, because Health Canada has largely ignored the patient wishes and the feedback gathered during their consultation period. So I think it's we see some improvements, but instead of finally recognizing patients as the primary stakeholders in this program, the concerns of police, of municipal authorities, and of physicians have been given primacy, which leaves us with an improved program, but one that's not nearly as patient-centered as it might have been had dispensaries finally been integrated into the new regulations and the personal production been left in place. Yet I'd like to end on an optimistic note. A few weeks ago, myself and a few co-organizers hosted a 2-day meeting to set policy research priorities for medical cannabis in Canada. And that included a keynote address by Mark Ware and participation by Health Canada, by the BC Ministry of Health, by police and fire departments, by researchers, patient representatives, the Canadian Association of Medical Cannabis Dispensaries, and the Union of British Columbia Municipalities. And the best thing is that this was paid, this research priorities meeting was paid for through federal money, through the Canadian Institute of Health Research. So in other words, you know, there's a pendulum that swings around medical cannabis access in Canada and the US, and you guys are swinging a little bit to the left right now, which is fantastic, and we love to see it. And we're swinging a bit to the right. It's getting a little bit more restrictive. But like yourselves, we work hard to make progress wherever and whenever we can. And so I want to thank Steph and Americans for Safe Access and all of you guys for your time and attention. I'll look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Philippe. We're actually working on a very similar project here in the US around certification and creating industry standards, and we've actually been working very closely with Philippe in that process. And actually, Jill Lamoureux is going to talk to you guys this afternoon about the Patients First certification program. But thanks, Philippe, always for your advice. Now we're going to hear from, I guess we're going around the globe, about the Netherlands program. And I want to just let you all know that last year I was actually able to go to the Netherlands. Charlie actually put together this trip that was a week that allowed me to go and actually do my own cannabis testing in a lab. So I actually now understand what calibration means and all these words that I've been using. But I also, more importantly, got to see how this industry works as far as a word that people use in labor is the chain of the supply chain, how it works within an industry that has been regulated. And it gave me such insight to see how we're going to do this in the U.S. And so not only was it just amazing to get to go to the Netherlands for a week, but it was also, I think, out of the many trips that I've been into a bazillion, and I mean a bazillion dispensaries here in the U.S., but to be able, and I know everyone's is the best in the whole country. That's what everyone tells me. But it was great to be able to see a process from seed to patient. I got to go into the pharmacies, see how a patient receives it, and that experience has really influenced our work here at ASA. So thank you so much.
I would at least like to thank you, Steph, for the invitation, getting over here. And I'm very happy to be here. It's quite a trip from Holland, and especially while I'm not located in Amsterdam, but 200 kilometers up north, in a rural area where we are basically since 10 years now doing medicinal cannabis for the Dutch government. Yes, we are working for the government, and we are just working on the basis of a contract with the government. I will tell you a little bit about what we are doing later. I will start off with how the situation developed in Holland from the late 90s, when it was decided that should be medicinal cannabis in the pharmacy, because everybody knows Holland, of course. We have a lot of coffee shops there. There was the not regulated market from coffee shops, recreational cannabis, and patients were depending on that source of cannabis, which was to the great satisfaction of many of those patients. But one of those patients was also the husband of our former health minister. And he was dying from cancer, and in his last half year, he was using cannabis to relieve his symptoms. And our health minister, at that time, she wasn't health minister, but later on she became health minister, but she was shocked by the fact that she couldn't obtain cannabis from proper quality controlled, standardized, whatever was needed, and not prescribed by a proper doctor. She was a doctor herself, and when she got in office, then she decided that medicinal cannabis should be in a pharmacy, in a pharmaceutical form, and well regulated. And she started looking into the international treaties and see whether that was possible to do it. And she found that it was possible, just like in Canada they found out it was possible, in Israel they found out it was possible, so you can do it. And that's where the whole thing started in the late 90s, first announcing that there should be cannabis available to patients on a quality control basis. And in the early 2000s, the government was opening up the possibility for producers to send in an application to start production of medicinal cannabis under very severe restrictions. So I want to take you now through the Dutch model, tell you a little bit more about standardization, quality control, tell you a little bit more about what's happening in Europe around Holland, because what's happened in Holland had an effect on Europe. And finally, I want to tell you a little bit about the company I represent here, together with George, and what we are doing. First and foremost, our minister decided that she wanted to introduce cannabis into the pharmacy, but under one restriction, the aim should be, in the end, to bring it through the drug approval process. It's a very important thing, because you want cannabis to be a real medicine. And that was her aim as well. So she looked into the UN Single Convention and said, we have to do everything by the book. And that's where she established this national program. And one of the requirements of a national program is that you have an office of medicinal cannabis. This office is basically a mandatory thing, and this office oversees the whole production chain from basically seeds, growing plants, to the quality control, the distribution, the packaging. Everything is overseen by that ONC. And of course, the other thing that is necessary is that you have standardized cannabis variety strains available. Standardized cannabis, what does that mean? I come to that later. But of course, producing things in a standardized way requires also standard procedures. And standard procedures are already available for production of herbal medicines. You have the good agricultural practice, the GAPs, and you have, of course, standard operating procedures, which are very well known within the pharmaceutical context. What is also very important is that if you produce cannabis, you're not going to judge yourself if it's good or bad. You can do that, of course, by lighting one up. But then, you know, you always say yours is best. So what you finally need is somebody outside that is telling you, is this good or is this not good? And in a regulated system, you don't have a group of people sitting down there and all lighting one up. No, we go to a laboratory for that purpose. So let's take a short look in the Dutch model. So it starts off with the Office of Medicinal Cannabis. It's a national agency, that's a formal word for it. And this agency controls everything and has a monopoly also on the trade in cannabis. It's similar to what's happening in Canada. It's also similar to what is going to happen in Israel. This national agency controls everything, including the money. They have grip on the money. And then it starts up with cultivation. Basically, that is what I'm here for. And what you see on the left and the right is what we do in our company. We grow cannabis, we manicure the cannabis, we do it all by hand, very neat, very well organized. And when that is done and our product is ready, it goes out of our company and it goes to the laboratory. What do they research there? Not only the content, they also look whether we are using stupid things like heavy metals or pesticides or whatever. And after that, it goes to the packaging company. That's a separate step. It's packaged in 5-gram packages, and that step allows, within pharmaceutical standards, that step allows for making it a real medicine. It will take it's a long story to explain that. But basically, what we are doing is producing a raw material, and when it goes through the packaging company, which is an official pharmaceutical company, they make it a medicine which is prescribable by a doctor. That's the whole point, of course. Because from the wholesaler, it goes to the pharmacy, and people that are eligible to get medicinal cannabis in the Netherlands, they need to get it prescribed from their doctor. It's not recommended. That's a big difference. The doctor takes liability for his patients in this regard. He is writing out a real prescription for that patient and giving him access to cannabis on a limited basis. The supply you get is at the most for 3 months. Diseases which cannabis are regularly prescribed for, we all know it's MS, it's the cancer, it's ALS, it's Tourette syndrome, etc. The cannabis is also used for research and for export, which I will tell about a little bit about later. Quality controlled production of standardized cannabis. It's a very, very long word, but it's basically telling what we are doing in our company. We start off with plant material. We don't start with seeds, because seeds, every cannabis seed is different. Every cannabis seed has its own genetics. Cannabis seeds are produced by a male flower and a female flower. As you all know, cannabis is dioecious. It has male flowers, female flowers. And like with humans, when you bring seeds and eggs together, so to speak, you get different individuals. And that's the same with cannabis. So what you have to do in the end is basically pick one seed. And if you have that one seed and you know exactly what plant is coming from it, you can use that plant to standardize. So you have standardized genetics. Enough. In Holland, it's a mandatory thing to grow cannabis for medicinal purposes, to grow it indoor. It's not allowed to grow outdoors. So when you do that, you are basically Mother Nature. You have to do everything that is needed for the plant to give it the best possible life. But again, standardization is very important, so you need fixed schedules for growing, you need fixed schedules for processing, so that everything happens in the good order, and the end product is always the same. Also, your active substances, your THC, your CBD, you want them in the same range always, so it's not unpredictable effects for patients, and also not for their doctors. In pharmaceutical language, it's also important to have predictable yields. We know what we get from one plant, because of the standardized situation we are working on. We don't work with any type of chemical to produce plants. We don't even use no pesticides, none whatsoever. It's a very important principle, because some people are saying, oh, you can use pesticides, there are levels of residue allowed. Well, those levels of residue are never tested when you smoke things, when you inhale it. And cannabis is mainly meant to be inhaled. About the reproducibility, our main variety, Bedrocan, I have here a picture that shows that these are 10 batches in a row. We produce batch-wise. We are able to produce 25, 26 batches a year. Here we have 10 batches in a row. And there is an allowed deviation, like in every medicinal product, there is a little allowed variety. We have it here also. But you can see that the allowed deviation, which is 15% of the standard value, is always reached by us in what we do. The other thing is, of course, the external quality control. The Dutch government developed a monograph on medicinal cannabis, and that monograph is exactly telling what the product should look like for each variety. It's not only, they're not talking about cannabis. Each variety we have, has its own monograph. And then it's looking into the appearance, the foreign materials, the microbiological contamination, of course, the absence of pesticides, heavy metals, and of course the water content is important. But at last also, the cannabinoid content and the profile is everything there. What is interesting in this regard, that separated from each other, Canada and the Netherlands developed a methodology that is similar to each other. So there is already some international standardization in this regard, and we are happy to share that, of course. What do we bring to the market in Holland? We started off with Bedrocan. That was the first and oldest variety we have. It's already available since 15 years, so way before the program started. We had this variety Bedrocan. At that time, it was not known as Bedrocan. At that time, it was known as a Jack Herrera. And I can tell you, we developed it. It's our variety. So it was due to the fact that the government was asking us to give, separate names, give your own names, that we decided to make something, to create a new name which was relating to us, basically. And you can see the B and the E every time coming up. The B is from my brother-in-law. He's my partner in the business. His name is Bruining, which is an E. My name is Urkelens, starting with an E, so that's the B and the E. We produce dried cannabis, which is in Dutch droge cannabis, so you have the DRO and the can from cannabis. So that's a fairly simple thing. That's how it started. The next variety came 1 year later because there was this other producer we had in the Netherlands, and he was producing, at that time, still allowed, he was producing in a greenhouse. And he was facing some trouble there. That it was a pity. I'm still pitying the fact that we are the only producer in Holland, because we should love to have more people around and see the program grow bigger. But that's another issue. So we had to take over the other variety which was on the market at that time, and we produced a variety which was a crossbreeding, mainly between a Hazen and an Afghani. And we called it Betropinol. Very difficult name again, but it is what it is. It has a 12% THC content. And then we found out, or we didn't find out, we heard from people, patients, many people were talking at that time, started talking about CBD, cannabidiol. And of course there was already this product coming to the market from GW, Pharmaceuticals in England, having a similar content of THC and cannabidiol. And we were just thinking, what you can put in a bottle, you can also get from a plant. And we started looking into that. And we found that variety, we made some crossbreedings, and we found our newest variety at that time, Beriol, containing only 6% of THC and a 7.5% content of 6% of THC and 7.5% of CBD, cannabidiol. And there were 3 varieties on the market, but there were still complaints from patients saying, these varieties, it's nice that you have them, but it's not what we are looking for. And many of them were complaining about the varieties we brought, that they didn't put them well to sleep. Sleep is a very important thing with cannabis, of course. And people were telling us, you should bring an indica. And we said, yeah, but tell us then, what is indica? What is the differentiation between sativa and indica? Because we didn't know at that time. And they said, well, indica is different. Indica is having CBD. Many people were saying indica is having cannabidiol, CBD. And we were saying, yeah, but we have CBD. We even have the AI94 for research purposes only, which is a clear CBD variety, having no THC in it, only CBD, but it's also in sativa. So then people were saying, yeah, but indica smells different and it looks different, and then we said, okay, it smells different. Let's look into that one. So we started looking into what we call the terpenes. The terpenes are the smelly stuff in cannabis, which are different from the cannabinoids. Cannabinoids don't smell. Terpenes give the smell to cannabis. And we saw that there was a difference between, what we name sativa and indica varieties, especially on the terpene side. So that's interesting. And we started looking into a good indica, but not many. It's still a relatively small product in the Netherlands that has, of course, a reason, because many people are depending on cannabis, and but not many people go to the pharmacy. Many of them still go in Holland to coffee shops, which is quite regular. But in the pharmacy, it's a very well-known. It's becoming a very well-known product now. We have multiple standardized varieties available, and what is most important, we have from the biggest health insurer in Holland, covering almost 1/3 of the people in Holland, we have full reimbursement. So that is a very important achievement, and I can tell you that this insurance companies, you know, they only work on money. And why is it then that they reimburse cannabis? Well, that's quite obvious, because it saves them money. It's quite clear. There is some export. This export is basically a deal between the Dutch government and other governments in Europe. There is product from us now going to Italy, Germany, Finland, and Switzerland. But in those countries, people are still facing reimbursement problems. So that's a real nasty thing at the moment. And of course, research is starting now on the basis of the fact that we have standardized cannabis varieties available, long time available. Researchers start getting interested in it, and their research, especially clinical research, is starting up slowly. It's starting up slowly, but it's starting up. And as everything with cannabis, as we always say, things with cannabis last 2 times longer, take 2 times longer as in a regular industry. What's happening in Europe, because Holland is exporting now to different countries in Europe. There are, in many countries in Europe, cannabis extracts like Sativex and Nabilone are available. But there are only a few countries that now provide herbal cannabis to patients. One of the first was Italy. It was initiated by the Italian government. It was not so much a patient-driven initiative. In 2006, there was a left-wing government in Italy, and they were just saying, we need cannabis, or we need cannabinoids. So they allowed basically all cannabinoids at that time, including herbal cannabis from the Netherlands. And what is interesting is that this year they decided to bring it back into the Italian pharmacopoeia, which is really an achievement, I think. The second country that came in was Finland. That was a patient-driven thing. There was one patient in Finland. He got out to the Netherlands, got himself cannabis prescribed, and went back with a bottle and said at customs, "This is my medicine, take me." And they took him. They really took him, but only for half a day. And then it was decided also after some court cases, it was decided in Finland also to allow patients access to cannabis. It's a decentralized thing there. Pharmacies can order on the basis of a prescription and then dispense it to patients. It's a growing program, by the way, in Finland. In Germany is a very interesting company. Germany wants everything regulated, and they are very, very well in that. And still, on the basis of court cases, it was a patient-driven thing. They made cannabis available in 2008. On a very, very restrictive basis. Patients need a prescription from their doctor, and then the doctor needs to describe what the patient's situation is, send it off to the medical authorities from the German government, and they must approve that the patient is eligible to obtain cannabis, and then the patient can get the cannabis. It's not reimbursed in Germany, and if I tell you that in the Dutch pharmacy you are paying around 8 to 9 euros a gram, in Germany for the same cannabis people have to pay now between 15 and 20 euros a gram, which is not really nice, but it's what it is. It's a very tightly controlled program, so. In Switzerland, only this year they started off with allowing cannabis in the pharmacy, herbal cannabis, pharmaceutical extracts, and they have now centralized import through a wholesale company for herbal cannabis from the Netherlands. Coming up, the Czech Republic. Last week, the president signed the bill. It's from 2014, cannabis will be available in Czech Republic by home production. They have set up a program that is similar to the Dutch program, and the start of the local production there is expected, next year. A little bit about what's the demand from the Dutch program, basically. We started off in 2003, and basically to our surprise in the beginning, the demand was lowering. This is on the basis of prescriptions. We did some research on that last year. No, 2011, it's already 13. And in the beginning, there was a slow decrease of demand, which was, we don't know what caused it, but it was there. It started in 2006 that the demand began rising, 10% annually, very slowly. Doctors were still very hesitant in prescribing, but they saw results, so they started prescribing more. And only since cannabis got reimbursed, you see this happening, and you see an immense increase in demand. But the increase is not only in Holland; it's in all other countries around us that now allow herbal cannabis. So that's the situation of today. Bettercan, that's our company, also. Established in 1984, we are almost 30 years there. We planted our first cannabis for seed production in 1991, which is 21 years ago, so we're a long time there. And in 2002, we got our first license for scientific purposes, as they call it. And after that, we were contracted because we showed that we were able to do so. In 2003, sales of prescriptions started. These are the highlights of our company, basically. 2008, we were ISO certified, and now our annual production is widened up to 450 kilos annually, starting this year, and it's still increasing. And this is our staff. At the moment, we have, of course, one general manager. We have a head of the growing department. We have a head of processing. We have a quality assurance manager, which is a pharmacist. And she is very precise, and she is always angry with everybody because we do everything wrong. We have a head of R&D. Some of you will know him. It's Arno Hazekamp. He is one of the researchers in Holland that has been working on cannabis for more than 10 years now. And we have 10 people working for processing, growing, packaging, etc. needed there. So we are a relatively small company with a relatively small turnover. But we are standardized. That's the whole point. Thank you.
Good morning, ASA, USA. I haven't felt so much close to home, out of home, as I do over here. So thank you, Steph, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be with this wonderful group of people. Really, ASA has been an inspiration for us in Israel for a long time. I took off the slides of ASA work because you're very familiar as in terms of patient education issues and so forth. So some facts about Israel. It's a very small country. It makes a lot of noise for a relatively small country. The neighbor, thank you very much. The neighbors are, we got problems with the neighbors. We have the highest, one of the highest ratios of university degrees and scientific papers and patents. So Israel is basically, you can call it many things, but it's a research nation and a startup nation, okay? We give great value for research, and cannabis research in Israel started by Professor Rafael Mishulam from the Hebrew University and Glasgow School of Medicine. He's the guy who identified in 1966 the THC, and later on he identified the anandamide, and with some colleagues. And you can see, just for comparison's sake, Israel is the size of New Jersey. And if you put Israel on the US map on there, it looks like a small lake in Minnesota. And I'm also an anti-occupation activist, so Israel's been So now we move on. Okay, this is a history of the medical cannabis program in Israel. Actually, before we started, 1995, here on the left, in 1994, after living here in the United States for 12 years, 4 of them here in Washington, 2 in Boston, and 5 in New York, when I came back to Israel, we started the Israeli Foundation in 1994, the Israeli Foundation for Drug Law Reforms, 1994. Because of all the noise and we wanted to decriminalize cannabis, demonstrations and so forth, in 95, this is a picture of Mishulam. Professor, can we dim the lights a little bit so you can see Mishulam? He deserves the So the parliament established a subcommittee to study the legal status of cannabis. Okay, I was the public representative, 102, and Mishulam was the head of the committee in 95. And you see a picture on the left. I was thrown out from that committee at the final hearing because the committee had 2 recommendations. One, not to change the legal status of cannabis, which I, of course, was against. But the committee also did was it recognized the medicinal usage of cannabis, and it says, okay, we have to look at it and try to regulate it. Okay. And that issue was led by Mishulam, and I, of course, supported it. In '96, I approached the Ministry of Health with a drug master file. I went and took a clinical research administrative course so I can speak the language of the authorities. The FDA and the Ministry of Health, to speak their language is very important because otherwise they don't understand a lot of what we say. And authorities generally are not confused by the facts or the truth. So, in 90, so later, few patients approached, and the ministry gave license to patients to grow. We think it should be an option for patients, but we find that many patients are not good gardeners, especially if they are last stages of life, and it's where a supply problem have to be addressed. So in 99, they established a committee. And in that year, I started a political party. It's called the Green Leaf Party, or ran for parliament. In Israel, you can start political parties. We have 50 political parties in Israel. Yeah. And we ran for parliament, and we got 1% the first time we ran for parliament, which was quite a shock for everybody, that the issue is worth 1% of the electorate. And then we kept on going to the Ministry of Health and so forth, and met with patient groups. It was a very slow learning curve for the Ministry of Health. And in 2004, we had 60 applicants for medical cannabis, 12 approval. That was 2004. In 2005, they nominated a new head for the medical cannabis program. It was called a program, and we'll talk about how it switched from program to an agency. And in 2007, the first licenses for 2 or 3 growers, and the ministry says the growers first have to give it for free to the patients. You want to go into medical cannabis? We have this unsustainable financial model. You give it for free for the patients. So the growers had to, put money from the pockets and finance it for a while. And then we looked and we searched for donations around the world. Some of them are good friends from America, including David Bronner, who donated, and some other good folks. And then in 2008, we opened a centralized distribution center. We already had 2,000 patients, sorry. And in 2013, the Ministry of Health established the agency, which is needed, according to UN drug conventions, it needed a specific agency to run the medical cannabis program. This is the graph of the number of patients. There's only 8 million people, and this is a physician perspective. Yehuda Baruch is the head of the program, was until recently. This is what he said. A lot of patients benefit from it. It's another medicine in pharmacopoeia, higher safety than opiates, no overdose. Okay. On the downside, he says doctors are afraid that the pain clinic will become a cannabis clinic. I mean, they're afraid for their reputation. And from a patient perspective, it's better. Cannabis is much better tolerated than opiates. No risk for overdose or death. A different mechanism of work can help where other medications did not. It's a social trend. I don't like to call it a social trend. Cannabis has been around for so many thousands of years. It's not a social trend. It's a good medicine, So don't. What strain to use? Who decides? And these are issues. Is self-growing allowed? This is a slide by Mishulam, Professor Mishulam from Hadassah. It's mind-boggling how many activities this plant has. I mean, you can see that the CBD has actually the highest number of positive activities from all the other cannabinoids. And a lot of research is going in Israel and also in other countries in the world. And it's not just hypotheses. They see all these good things that cannabis does. And different research groups are doing different aspects of the studies. These are the current indications that in Israel are allowed by the national program: chronic pain due to proven organic etiology, orphan diseases. Many orphan diseases, the pharmaceutical companies don't develop products because too few patients. So very sick people with very obscure diseases are not being helped by the pharmaceutical industry, who's only interested in making money. HIV patients with loss of body weight under CD4 400, inflammatory bowel disease, as opposed to irritable bowel syndrome, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, and malignant tumor in various stages of the disease. This is the breakdown of the number of patients. I think it's quite interesting. Pain is the biggest indication, cancer second, multiple sclerosis, neurological disorders, various diseases, psychiatry, mostly PTSD. We'll talk soon about PTSD, Parkinson, gastro, ALS, and diabetes. This was how it was done until now. A patient needed to go to a specialist, and then he recommends it. So there were very few specialists who were not too keen to get the reputation of a cannabis specialist. And that's, as many observed here, doctors are gatekeepers, actually, limiting the number of patients, limiting the access to patients just because they're afraid of their reputation. This has to be addressed somehow. So the patients need a specialist doctor. Then by the 7 doctors, growers grow the medical cannabis. It went to a centralized distribution and safekeeping, and some of them directly sold to patients, and that's going to stop now. This is the new model. The National Medical Agency. So the patients with permit get a permit from specialty physicians. They buy it from pharmacies, yes, or receive home delivery. The connection between the growers and the patients will stop because, according to UN drug conventions, the government has to buy through a monopolistic arm, all the cannabis from the growers and distribute it to the pharmacies, just like the Dutch did. And that monopolistic name agency is called Sarel here, and they will distribute it through the pharmacies. pharmacies with valid narcotics licenses. And this is the monopolistic arm of the National Medical Cannabis Agency. You will buy all the crop, distribute it to pharmacies. There's an option of home delivery with additional fee, option of trial and error, try to decide which strain among different growers gives the best result to specific patients. And that's the source of that is Yuda Baruch. And that's the, when the American government, which I get a little mad sometimes about the American government, in one sense, the American government has been very good and supportive of Israel all those years. But in terms of medical cannabis, I mean, I think it's the way they behave is a cruel and unreasonable punishment to patients here in the United States. Number of cannabis. So when they say they don't recognize the medicinal value of cannabis, look at this slide. See the number of cannabis-related publications in the last 50 years. Okay. So this is until 2004. There were almost 3,000 studies with medical cannabis. And now some of the research that we do in Israel. This is a pilot study, an open pilot study, a treatment for combat-related PTSD. Okay, we have so many wars in Israel. And we have a lot of soldiers with PTSD. We have some civilian population also with PTSD, which is different in the United States. You only have veterans who are suffering from PTSD. And they took about 29 subjects, and they gave them cannabis with 23% THC with less than 1% CBD. And they told them to smoke it, okay? And then these were people, veterans, who no other medication in the pharmacopoeia helped them. I mean, PTSD is resistant to current treatment as we know it. You know, I mean, they give them antidepressant and this and anti that, and it doesn't work. So they gave them they said smoke it and see what happened. And if you look at the results are mind-boggling. See, significant decrease in the total CAPS score of the three subsections of the test was seen. The severity of intrusive symptoms, which are most characteristic of PTSD, dropped by half within 2 months of the treatment. The severity of the avoidance system dropped by 38% within 2 months of the treatment, and the severity of the increased arousal system dropped by 43% within 2 months. There was also a significant improvement in the self-reported emotional distress and social work function, according to the subjects. Within 2 months of the initiation of treatment, there was an improvement of 35%. A marked improvement was also indicated by the assessment of the subject general condition by the DSM evaluation. Specifically, an improvement of 45% was seen in the general evaluation of the subject's psychological state after 2 months of smoking cannabis. Well, this study has to be expanded and leveraged. There are 250,000 PTSD patients in the United States. 1 minute. 250,000 U.S. veterans from all the recent wars, Afghanistan and Iraq, and the Department of Defense and the federal government should take responsibility and give these people cannabis to save their lives and their families' lives. Now this is a picture of the first grower who got the license for 50 plants. This is his mother. She's a biology teacher. And him, you see no white coats at this stage or anything. It was just the beginning. They did it on the roof of the house in the Galilee. Okay? Nothing standardized here. It was just the beginning. I introduced this guy to the Ministry of Health. And this is how it looks today. Okay? In contrast to the Dutch method, we grow in greenhouses because we have good weather and good sunlight, so we save on electricity, even though it's not 100% standardized as you can get indoors. This is one company called Kando. This is a flower. Okay, and you can see this picture of a greenhouse grown in the desert, and what you can see from there. First, Sometimes it grows very tall in the desert. It's not a good place to grow cannabis in the desert because there are sandstorms sometimes, okay? But there was no choice at some point for some growers just to do it in the desert because they wanted them far from everywhere else. But there are many varieties that are grown, and this is extremely important when you have a national program that the cannabis should experiment with a number of varieties to find out which variety is better for them. We have bioavailability, we have different pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, and you don't know in advance what's going to work for who, okay? So we have about 100 varieties grown among 8 licensed growers, okay? And this is how they consume it, the patients. Dried cannabis flowers, oil, a trade-off exists between the number of bottled and weight dried flowers, cannabis-laced brownies, ointment, cannabis brownies, ready-made joints, and vaporizers. You can use vaporizers in oncology departments in hospitals now in Israel. Okay? So that I think is very exciting. That is really tremendous. This is a good friend of mine, Mimi Peled, who worked with Valerie Corral for many years, and she moved to Israel. And she allowed me to share, she's doing patient education in Israel, okay, in a centralized location. And so some of these are her slides, and that's wonderful, Mimi. So we figured we need a respectable environment for patients in the distribution center, separate from the growing operation, full transparency. And they gave us initially in a mental health hospital a room to distribute it from the growers, which was a very dingy place, but we slowly fixed it up. And the Medical Cannabis Distribution Center is called the Mechkar, was born. It serves as a place where learning, transparency, and cooperation coexist to pave the road for promotion of medical cannabis as a legal and legitimate medication recognized by the State of Israel. This is how it looks. This is a central distribution of cannabis right now, where the education also takes place. You see on this picture, the second from the left, that's the warehouse, where right now, this is going to change soon because it's going to move to the monopolistic government agency. There's a lab there. There's a paraphernalia store, and a coffee place, and a yard. And so we believe that education is very important. Many patients, most patients in Israel never met cannabis in their lives. They come see us when they're old and sick. So it's very important to make them relax. You talk to them. You address their concerns, their symptoms. You teach them how to consume. You match strains with symptoms. And what we need to do now is, there's a lot of ignorance in the medical world about cannabis. Doctors are not being taught in medical school what is cannabis, how it can help the patients. They're taught about everything else, but we have to develop a curriculum for doctors and for nurses and for medical staff, people who come and interact with patients. This should be a national priority of this movement. Okay. Lessons learned. This is the questions that we ask the patients, and we get feedback from them. This is how we should improve it. We believe in Israel, I believe personally, that every doctor should have the right to prescribe it, not limited by few doctors. Better quality control in real time, grow it under GMP, good manufacturing practice, and GAP and some other standards. Reduce THC levels and increase CBD levels. Have a national medical insurance companies pay, some of them do. Improve the education for doctors, nurses, and patients. Prepare a curriculum in medical schools and nursing school. Allow distribution to pharmacies and not few limited locations. Increase government funding for medical cannabis research. Few last word. Steph, can I get 2 more minutes?
Yeah,
Thank you.
we can give him 2 more minutes, right?
Yeah.
All right.
This just came out from the American Botanical Council. This is they have a publication called Herbal Ground. From all their writing about herbal medicines and herbs in the last 30 years. For the first time in 30 years history, they have cannabis covered on the front page of their herbal. Okay? The good news is, you can look it up. If you type herbal gram, and you'll find it. This is a picture of from Israel of growing. And what's more important is what they wrote there, where it's underlined. It says that other herb organizations also are dealing with cannabis. The American Herbal Pharmacopoeia is developing standards, monograph and therapeutic compendium, the first of its kind in North America, and the American Herbal Products Association Cannabis Committee just released draft recommendation for regulators on the legal dispensation of medicinal cannabis. Okay, so these are great news, and really you should look at this article. I just did a quick survey of what patients pay in different countries. So in the U.S., what I figured, it's from anywhere for 10 to 21 dollars a gram. In Canada, that's, am I right?
That's the federal supply.
Yeah, okay. In Holland, it's very expensive, the medicine, okay. And when you export it to Germany, it costs $700 per 30 grams in Germany, okay. In Israel, it's $100 per 30 gram to 100 grams. They don't differentiate between the quantity, so it's a fixed $100. And then if you look at the options, the extracts or the GW, Sativax cost in the UK $800 a month per patient, Sativax, okay? It's not covered by any insurance company. And the Marinol costs $700 per month for 30 milligrams. So if you look at the cost of the flower versus the medications that are produced by pharmaceutical companies, you're talking about a factor of 10, maybe it's cheaper, okay? And when the many patients who become sick and their financials are in ruins, I mean, the cheap flower, access to a cheap flower is a priority in my eyes, okay? Okay, MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. Rick Doblin is a good friend. And what basically this says is that NIDA is, and the DA are basically, it's passive-aggressive. Their behavior can be characterized as passive-aggressive. They don't allow researchers in this country, which is a crying shame, that such a leader in international research does not allow medical cannabis research in the United States to happen. So we are here in Washington, and if something will come out of this conference, or from my speech, is to go to Congress and the federal government, if anybody hears this wonderful group of people and many patients here, is to allow American researchers research with medical cannabis to learn more how it can help. And you always said there's not enough research. There wasn't enough research because all the time you didn't let it happen. Okay, you didn't let the researchers happen. And one last thing, these are the common reasons why governments not launch a medical cannabis program. This is their excuses, okay? It has no medical value. It has not enough research. Conventional treatments are good enough. It's addictive, damaging, and illegal. No medicine has been approved in the form of smoking. Before they invented the patch, no medicine was approved as a patch, as well. It's prohibited by UN Drug Convention. That's another lie. UN Drug Convention allows you to have a national medical cannabis, okay, as they do in the Netherlands and in Canada, and other excuses. Working with authorities, we won't go into this. Just last, a quick anecdote. We get a lot of people who are coming now to Israel to view the program. When Ethan Nadelman from the DPA, okay, we're doing great work here in the United States, came to Israel. I took him to the National Medical Cannabis Distribution Center, and we saw this guy with white uniforms, with all kind of, like a lieutenant. I didn't know. I never saw these uniforms. There are different types of uniforms in Israel. So Ethan told me, what is this guy? Where's he from? I thought he was from the Navy, white uniform. So I went to check, and he was the medical officer of a prison who came to take medical cannabis brownies to prisoners with license who were using in prison. Isn't that amazing? Okay, so just to finish, thank you very much, and bye-bye.